We know there's 2 times that women exit sport. One is when they get their menstrual cycle. The second is when they have a baby. And there's also a lot of research that says if women stay active during pregnancy, exercise, maybe it's not running, but exercise during pregnancy, they're twice as likely to get back to the activities they love to do. Okay, they're gonna hit the trails, they're gonna hit the roads, they're gonna hit the Oval Office, whatever that running looks like to them. And so if we could give them the tools to exercise and feel safe with exercise during pregnancy, we know if the 5 people who read that book, that they're likely to get back doing the very same sport that we all love and endear so much. And so that's really what I think success looks like to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Shannon Rowbury and Jessica Dorrington, who are 2 amazing women leading the way in terms of the discussion around pregnancy and postpartum. And they actually have an upcoming book called Strong as a Mother, Your Complete Pregnancy to Postpartum Health Program. This conversation is a comprehensive deep dive into pregnancy and postpartum and running and exercise within those 2 things. And whether you are a 12-year-old middle school boy listening or a mom 8 months into pregnancy, I am very confident this conversation is going to provide you value. It's going to provide you tools to either help those in your life who are going through these things, or if you yourself are going through these things, it's going to give you the tools to literally implement today to make your pregnancy smoother and your postpartum life smoother. I really enjoy this conversation. Shannon and Jessica have a long list of accolades. I will not read them off for the sake of time, but you can scroll down in the show notes and read a little bit about them. Really enjoy this conversation. Hope you guys do too. And if you do, share it with a friend, give us a 5-star review, and hit the follow button so you don't miss more conversations like this in the future. Appreciate you all. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sat across from 2 badass women who know a lot more about pregnancy than me and a lot more about running and postpartum and all that stuff. So I'm here to be enlightened because I hope to have a pregnant wife one day. So I'm doing my research a few years in advance. Jessica and Shannon, welcome to The Running Effect. How are you guys doing today?
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for having us.
What's the inception for the book? Shannon, you've been on this podcast before. You're kind of the athlete. Jessica, it's been fun diving into your background, a lot of your medical expertise. And so it seems like a match made in heaven with these subjects. But I'm curious, how did you guys meet each other? And how did that relationship form into co-authorship?
Yeah, so Jess and I met back in 2017 when I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter, Sienna, who's now 7. And at that point in 2017, I'd made 3 Olympic teams. I was training at the Nike World headquarters. And I remember trying to find medically backed kind of programmatic information about how to be active during pregnancy because I knew I wanted to return to training. And it was wild that given kind of where I was, the connections that I had, it still was so hard to find. It really was more about, I'd call up Alicia Montano, I called up Paula Radcliffe, I called up some of these other amazing mothers who'd had kids and come back to training and got advice from them on what they had done. But also for them, it was very much sort of like, grasping around in the dark. And fortunately for me, I was introduced to Jess. She's based in Portland and can share more about her background, but she really became my guide through pregnancy. I was fortunate that, my coach, Pete Julian, and Dave McHenry, who was my PT and team weight coach, knew her, trusted her, and said, we understand the limits of our knowledge. Let's hand you over to Jess. But as I was working with Jess, I just remember having these conversations about, if it's this hard for me, how impossible must it feel for the other moms out there? And really, I think that was the spark that ultimately, all these years later, finally led to creating Strong as a Mother as a resource that we wished we had had.
And from the medical side, in 2015, the American College of Obstetrics changed kind of what they said we could do during pregnancy. When I had my kids, they said, you can't get your heart rate over 140 beats per minute. And as a runner, anybody going up any incline knows that can happen very, very quickly. And so we started to see a really fast change from the medical side. And as a PT, you only get a few sessions with a patient to try and help them with developing a program, maybe helping them with aches and pains that they're feeling. And I just wanted to give them all this knowledge and power that we had and somehow make it very concise so that it could be complementary with them navigating with their healthcare providers, but also getting all the information that we know. Because then in 2020, they came out and said, well, you can do whatever you want to do when you're pregnant and whatever you were doing before. And that left a lot of people who were really highly athletic, doing a lot of high intensity activity going, well, how much is too much? So we had this really big shift in paradigm, and we needed to get that research out to people so that they could make their own informed choices and really decide what was right for them during this chapter of their life.
Shannon, you said something at the end of your response there that I loved, of essentially, creating something that you wish you had back in the day. And I find the best products, the best books, the best, you name it, always come from that singular desire of creating something that you wish you had, because your heart is more in it rather than, the businesses or companies that are made purely just for monetary purposes, or they see a gap in the market. For me, this podcast was created because in 8th grade, I didn't really know where to go to for running resources. And so I was like, well, I want to create what myself would have wanted. So very similar along those lines. Can you speak deeper to that passion you had for this project and how it, ultimately led into this book and this piece of art?
Yeah, well, first, I love that you made this in 8th grade, that you started this whole podcast in 8th grade.
I had the
amazing.
idea 8th grade. It took me 2 years to act on it. So sophomore year.
Amazing.
But I think that is why we hit it off in the first place, or at least the respect I have for you, because what you created did truly come from this place of love and passion. And I would say you probably have experienced the need for that love and passion. Our journey, it took us, the book will come out about 9 years after we started creating it. And some of that was life stuff. I had a kid, I was returning to fitness, like to competition. Jess has a very busy practice. There were logistical reasons, but truly the biggest barrier to us getting this book made was that first, it was so hard to find a literary agent who believed that there was legs to this project. And then it was so hard to find a publisher who believed in it as well. And Jess and I kept being met by these people in the industry that kept saying to us, nobody wants this. And then matched with every time I would go to a event where I would speak to fellow moms, Jess, this is her daily life. These women kept saying, why doesn't this exist? I wish I had this. How soon can I get it? And so there was this disconnect between what the industry believed women deserved and what they themselves were actually asking for and desperately wanting. And so I think that kept the belief alive in us long enough that we just kept fighting for the book. There was a point at which we designed the entire thing to be published, like self-published, via Canva, because we were like, this needs to happen in the world. And if no one else will believe in it, then we'll do it ourselves. And it was right around at that moment that we found our literary agent. It was right around at that moment where we found Blue Star and Sasquatch Books and our editor, Avalon, who were like, yes, please, we need this. Avalon was a collegiate athlete herself, had one kid and was pregnant with her second. But we needed people in the industry that could could look up and understand who that customer was and what they deserved to have.
And our dream team between the three of us, between Shannon and Avalon and myself, it just felt like, there were moments it was really hard in that long process. And there were so many times one of us, our passion would get ignited again, and then it would carry the three of us. So it really was just this nice triad of passion fueled to bring this to the masses, because women deserve this. We need to know the education. And so many of the guiding principles that we're talking about during pregnancy are some of the same guiding principles that we use when we're coming back from injury. If you've had an ACL surgery, you expect you're going to get 12 to 16 weeks of PT. You expect there's going to be protocols and programs to get you back doing what you love to do. And with pregnancy, they're kind of like, well, we don't really know, and we're not really sure how much you can get back to as quickly as you can. And so we just really wanted to bring more clarity and some guardrails for people to make their own decisions and get the knowledge.
Shannon, going back to something you were talking about there, just in regards to you kind of being like, screw it. If no one's going to help us out, we're still going to do it ourselves. We're going to create this on Canva. Obviously, you guys want the book to do really well. And at the end of that, what does doing well mean? It means getting in the hands of more and more readers, which you guys know will hold impact. But at the end of the day, it seems like you were going to be content if only 5 people read it, but it impacted those 5 people. Can you speak to kind of the core mission of saying, look, there's nothing like this on the market. And even if 10 people order this off of Amazon, it's worth it. Like obviously you want more than 10 people, but you get my general idea.
Yeah, I mean, well, Jess's practice is this every day, and so she's able to get into the hands of the women that she sees. But she's based in Portland, and because of the licenses, can't like give this to everybody everywhere in her regular. Can't see everybody. Like there's one Jess, and so for us, it truly was. The desire to put this out in the world in a way that people could receive it. And so we knew that if we self-published, it would be, more logistics that we would have to manage. It would be harder to get it out to the people. The production quality would be as best as we were capable of. But it was always our desire to find a publisher because we knew the book deserved that. But I think, really having it created was the important part. And we figured, even regardless of how the book was created, we would find methods, whether it was through digital platforms, whether it was through partnerships, whether it was through social media, to just keep putting that information out there. And I think there's just some really compelling stats and reasons why this should exist. And I think Jess and I have felt, in a way, that 9-year delay sort of took us from being ahead of our time to really part of a cresting wave of desire for information, awareness of the importance of pregnancy and postpartum health, pelvic floor, women's, like the needs of female athletes in general. And so, I don't know, Jess, do you want to share a little bit too about, you mentioned in 2020, the shift in recommendations, but I think there are some really compelling statistics, for me at least, that just kept being like, this will be needed even if people don't quite get it yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think what success to us, Dominic, is we know there's 2 times that women exit sport. One is when they get their menstrual cycle. The second is when they have a baby. And there's also a lot of research that says if women stay active during pregnancy, exercise, maybe it's not running, but exercise during pregnancy, they're twice as likely to get back to the activities they love to do. Okay, they're going to hit the trails, they're going to hit the roads, they're going to hit the Oval Office, whatever that running looks like to them. And so if we could give them the tools to exercise and feel safe with exercise during pregnancy, we know if the 5 people who read that book, that they're likely to get back doing the very same sport that we all love and endear so much. And so that's really what I think success looks like to us. I also, as a PT, pelvic health and the core, and knowing how the core transfers load for power in our sport, and knowing that all the women's health topics that are out there, we know that patients don't often know what that means. Social media is ticking up. I'm sure now that you've done this podcast, your social media algorithm is going to show you a lot of women's health things in your feed. But we know that social media is helping drive that. What some of the, giving the book 9 years to come out, we were able to put a lot more of the research that's coming out of our profession so that patients can be their own patient advocate. They're going to read about things and learn about things, and now they can feel safe going to their doctor and saying, like, what about this or what about this? I'm concerned because I do have some of these symptoms, because the likelihood is it takes people about 6 years before they're going to get back and talk to their doctors about some of these issues.
Wow. Well, Jess, I have news for you. I think my social media feed was preparing me for this conversation, because actually I had a question in my back pocket that I wanted to ask the medical professional about. I hate to admit it, but I do have some of the TikTok brain that the rest of my generation has. And one of those things is I've seen a few reels, and I don't like particularly remember the specifics of them, but I remember generally what they were. It was a few moms. I've seen this on a few different occasions, basically comparing their experiences when they were pregnant and not moving at all to when they were pregnant and they continued some light exercise or running. I think it was mostly gym stuff was the stuff I was seeing, and how much better labor went in the pregnancies that they moved. And this is a fascinating, I would say, paradigm shift where, like, yeah, as you guys are saying, 5-10 years ago, I feel like there was kind of this notion of like, don't do anything. And even my oldest sister, she won't listen to this, but I'm hopefully not speaking on it. I think this was her experience. The first pregnancy, she didn't really do anything. Second pregnancy, did a lot of stuff, and the labor was like infinitely better. So what's the science behind that? And what's the shift like culturally where movement is not demonized and it's probably not the best thing to sit on your couch for 9 months?
Yeah. There's a ton of research. So we tend to give labor or go into labor a few days earlier. We tend to have healthier labors, healthier birth weight. The effects for both mom and for baby are absolutely vast. So that's why ACOG has changed the information, because we now know it's so healthy for baby's metabolic system, mom's systems, to be able to exercise during pregnancy. So there's a huge, big change in that. And it really does help you bounce back faster. You always hear people saying, oh, I want to bounce back after baby or get back after baby. It's really what we're doing during pregnancy that sets us up for success for afterwards.
Well, and I was going to say, like, so on that line, there's some stats we include in the book. So some things, for mothers, it reduces the risk of gestational diabetes by 24 to 38%, enhances their ability to handle the physical demands of labor, lowers the likelihood of needing a cesarean delivery, improves psychological well-being, and reduces the risk of depression during pregnancy and postpartum, promotes better postpartum recovery, eliminates or improves lower back pain, improves muscular tone and posture. And that's for the mom. For the baby, like, the great thing is I've heard, people say, think about mothers being active as selfish for them, but the reality is it's also good for baby. So if you're in one of those familial relationships where the only people seem to care about the baby and they forget that the mother is a person too, for babies, it improves placental growth, volume, and function. It helps regulate the baby's weight. It improves the baby's muscle tone. It increases the likelihood of a vaginal delivery for beneficial bacterial exposure, can promote a shorter labor, and can improve the baby's position. So it's better for
Sold.
both like mom and baby. And our book isn't designed to say like these are the outcomes you want. Our book is really much more about empowering moms to understand what's going on in their body, how they can support their body, and when they go into labor and delivery, to understand some of the different interventions they might be offered, what they mean, how they help, like considerations. It's really, truly, we're not trying to say there is a right way to be pregnant and to give birth and to recover after, but instead provide information so that the mother can decide what's best for her.
And treat it like a race, right? We talk about like the labor and delivery is like a marathon, and you're doing intervals in between that. So it's really getting the body prepped for delivery and realizing the physical event that it is for mom.
In running words, Shannon, off of what you ended with there, you'd probably say it's essentially like looking at a running program and saying, okay, most people are generally doing about 80% of the same stuff, but we're going to individualize for the same desired outcome. Not every athlete's the same, so the training plan is going to look different, but you should probably do some threshold, you should probably do some hills, you should probably do strides.
Yeah,
exactly. With some exceptions.
Depending on your event, depending on your body,
exactly.
There's going to be unique variables that you should dial one way or the other, but first you have to even know what those variables are. And I remember being pregnant with my daughter, and there were n number of apps about, what's happening for the baby when you're pregnant and what fruit size it is similar to. But such little information about what was happening in my body. And I remember, I'm a well-educated athlete for understands my body for a living, but that realization that, oh, my lungs are being pushed up and my diaphragm's expanding and all my other stuff is getting pushed out of the way, and to make space for my baby. And then as a result, what does that actually mean for my posture and for my strength and for the strain that's put on those muscles? That didn't there was nowhere to find that except for Jess. And we wanted to do something about that.
I love it. I love it. Obviously, Shannon, you said, depends on the person, what's going to be prescribed, what's best for that person. But Jess, I want to ask you, like, generally, we're not robots as humans, but assuming you had a carbon copy robot, like what does a rough ideal pregnancy look like in terms of movement and exercise? And I may offend runners listening. That's okay. Do you have, studies or research or just general opinions on what's best in terms of sport? Is it Pilates? Is it gym work? Is it running, trail running? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the general guideline is you can continue to do anything you were doing previously, and you can even start new activities now. So if you were sedentary before, you can, under guidance, start to add those activities. They want you to do 150 minutes of moderate intensity per week. So really taking and saying all of most days of the week, you're getting out, getting active, getting your heart rate up. We can't use our heart rate as much during pregnancy, so we go by a couple things called the talk test, where can you talk comfortably, kind of carry on a conversation still. Maybe you have to take a breath after a few words, but can feel relatively comfortable when you're speaking, or something called the Borg scale. And right now that Borg scale is set on, it's a scale from 6 to 20, kind of an awkward number to be set on. But 6 would be something very, very easy. 12 to 14 is what we call moderately hard. And that's where they say we can kind of exercise at. Even if you've been more vigorous in your activity, you can also go more into the vigorous activity as well. Where it lands for what type of cardio, it really is about comfort. It's about your biomechanics. What we do see, whether people are recreational athletes or whether they're the pro and Olympic athletes that I've worked with, is everybody usually settles in the middle. Everybody reduces the same thing we all reduce when we're dealing with injury or coming back after a break from maybe a hard season, is we change the variables of frequency, intensity, duration, and our work-rest ratios. And those start to kind of slowly come down during pregnancy, and then postpartum, those variables are what we have to change to get back. So adding, frequency, intensity, duration at the right ratio so that we're not going into too much load on the tissues. It's probably my favorite word as a PT is load versus tissue adaptation, right? Like if you're a high school runner and you sit on the couch all summer and then you're trying to go back into season and you're trying to pump in 50 miles a week, it's too much for what the tissue can adapt to. And that's the same thing that we have to be cognizant during pregnancy and postpartum, is not going past load versus tissue adaptation, where we get those repetitive use injuries and the stress reactions and all the things that we see in our competitive runners as well as during pregnancy.
I'm now going to use the 6 to 20 as my new metric when I ask people to rate things. How'd you like this movie on a scale of 6 to 20?
Out of the 6 to 20.
I might have to go back to biology class or just what I remember from family members having babies. And by the way, when I signed up for this podcast, I signed up to make myself look like a fool because I don't know these things as well. But there are 3 trimesters, right? Do I have that right?
Yes, you have it.
Okay.
Right.
Technically, we call the next 12 weeks postpartum as the 4th trimester, but there are 3.
So we'll say 4 for the sake of my question. I can sleep easy tonight knowing I knocked that one out of the park. I did not Google it before asking this question. How does exercise and how you view it change depending on the trimester? I know from personal experience, a lot of people have morning sickness like that first trimester, and then each trimester comes with its own unique variables is what I'm trying to say. So how do you kind of allocate exercise, or how you view it depending on what trimester you're in?
Yes, I mean, first trimester really is person dependent. So a lot of times people are doing a lot more rest. I always say your body's under a huge construction zone, making space for baby. And so people spend a lot more time kind of listening to their body resting versus always getting out and moving. But you can still use heart rate a little bit more during that time frame. Second trimester, what becomes mostly for some women is some women can stop running at 12 weeks. Let's say they go, you know what, this just doesn't feel like risk versus benefit is It doesn't feel comfortable anymore. Some people make it all the way to 40 weeks. So it really is dependent on their biomechanics. But in the second trimester, the baby in the uterus becomes, from being a pelvic organ, becomes an abdominal organ. So you can imagine running with, a 10-pound sack of potatoes on your belly. It becomes a little bit more difficult. And depending on your biomechanical structure and shape, sometimes it's harder to continue to do. So it really is dependent. And then third trimester, most people are just ready to get to the finish line of delivery, tend to slow down a little bit towards that last month and really focusing on getting energy, resting up for the big day, just like we would taper for any marathon or any race.
Well, and then the exercises, so in the book, the way that we structured Strong as a Mother, it follows the 4 trimesters. They're color coded. There's illustrations as well. But in each trimester, we have exercise plans. These are ones that Jess has developed and used in her practice for years. And I would say, and Jess, you can fill in my gaps, but the first trimester are a little bit like you can do a little bit more with the moms. By the end of the third trimester, it's a lot more about kind of like mobility, preparing for birth, some balance work. Those same exercises then postpartum become the foundation of our return to exercise plan. So we have it set up in such a way that our moms are learning all of those exercises throughout pregnancy, so that when they hit postpartum and things are more chaotic because they're probably getting less sleep and they have a new person to care for, they can then take those same exercises as they build back into consistent, perhaps higher volume training over the course of 12 weeks.
Yep. And I would just add, in the fourth trimester postpartum, we have exercises that are more kind of, think about glutes and more global exercises. Then we have more of a core-based program, and then pelvic floor is also a component. And then we teach them what they can do. What can you do on day 1? You should just be resting. When can you start going for walks? When can you start doing a run jog, so that by the 12th week, you're back running about 30 minutes for your activity. So we've got a couple different programs at the end that are very prescriptive to guide you each week. And some moms take and embrace that, and they say, yes, I want to try and follow right away. Others, especially some of my pro athletes, have said, you know what? I finally get to take a break. I'm not going to start this. I'm going to embrace this moment. I'm going to, just sit on the couch and enjoy my baby. And I might pick that up at 6 weeks or 12 weeks or maybe 6 months down the road, but it gives them the progression that they can get back to, almost like a couch to 5K program.
Totally. Shannon, I'd love to hear you speak. That you was so drawn out as I was trying to collect my thoughts. You that's where editing comes in, but we'll keep it raw for the people and leave it in. You had a kid is what I'm trying to say, and you were a professional runner at the time of having a kid. And I'm really curious if you guys write about, or if you have opinions or thoughts on eating specifically while you are pregnant, because the body is going to need a lot more nutrients, because you're not just feeding, one human being, but 2. And specifically, if you are still moving your body or working out or running or whatever it might be, you still are going into that caloric deficit through that stuff. So you're not just having to fuel once over, but twice over with a kid, and then maybe 3 times over if you keep moving. So any thoughts or opinions on that?
We spent a lot of time thinking about what we could fit in the book, and ultimately we didn't include much nutritional advice, not because we didn't want to, but because both the space limitations of the book, it's already close to like 300 pages with what we have. And we really wanted to lean into our expertise. And so there's so much about that pregnancy and postpartum fitness. Jess is a physical therapist trained in both or licensed in both pelvic floor and orthopedic. So we really wanted to lean into her expertise and my expertise as a pro athlete. Our hope is to continue to build on the information that this book provides. I struggled when I was, especially postpartum, because I breastfed my daughter and my son, and there was not any research that I could find that helped understand the caloric needs, and then the breakdown of those caloric needs, like fat versus carbs, and how to apply it towards training. And so I often would feel underfueled. I'd always carry snacks with me. So it is I would say your question is really a call to action that we've seen. And I know there's some research being done. I've spoken to some individuals who are trying to understand that better, but we have to start by accepting the fact that research in general about women's bodies, especially active women's bodies, is limited. So then you add the layer of pregnancy and it's even more scarce. Most of the studies that are out there, when they talk about the fueling and timing, are based on studies of males because they're simpler to study. They don't have menstrual cycles. They, so much that goes into it. And so, I would say, to your specific question, it was a struggle for me. It was an experiment as I went along. And I'm excited about the people out there that are starting to research it and the wearables that I think can help inform it. And Jess and I hope to, continue to provide resources like that through Strong as a Mother and through 4-2, which is our kind of community that we're trying to build around this topic.
And I would say this is the area we're missing the mark on the most in pregnancy. I was just part of a Delphi study, which is kind of a study where they ask those who are working in this space, who are working with elite athletes in kind of running and sport, saying, what do we need to study next? And all of this bubbled to the top. We know athletes, about half that come back from pregnancy are getting stress reactions. And I will tell you, I don't think it's from the biomechanics. I don't think it's necessarily from all the core strength. It's from diving into that relative energy deficiency in sport that we talk about all the time with athletes. And all of a sudden you're not sleeping, your sleep is interrupted, your hormones haven't come back yet, you're breastfeeding, and we haven't figured out these nutritional needs. And the athletes I've seen that have had stress reactions, it's always been either they had high stressors at work or at home. We know athletes that sleep less than 8 hours a night are at a higher risk of injury. So any postpartum mom is not getting 8 hours consecutive. And so if we can get those pieces in our profession moving forward, I think we're really going to be able to do a lot for moms in this space and give them more prescriptive nutritional needs, hormonal challenges, and understanding how those are impacting, and give them more guidance in that area.
I have two questions for you both. You guys can fight over. Well, let's have one of you answer one and one of you answer over the other, and then if either has notes off of it, please speak to it further. But my two questions are: we have a lot of younger athletes listening. And to the females out there who are younger, what spurred this question is the Red S discussion. I've had nutritionists, registered dietitians, anyone can call themselves a nutritionist, registered dietitians, who have spoken to that topic. And it's some crazy statistic, like 65% of athletes are at risk or close to having Red S. And my question on that end is, for a younger female athlete listening, basically what you do now and how you take care of your body will translate long-term into pregnancy and how you have kids. So I'm curious if you could speak to the younger athlete listening. Maybe there's a freshman in high school who's like, this is interesting to hear about, but doesn't affect me at all. And it's like, well, it does. And then on the other end, we have a lot of coaches who listen and a lot of men who listen. And I'm curious on that perspective, like even in my shoes, this is important stuff to know. I think someone like me could very easily be like, well, I'm never going to have a kid. This doesn't affect me. But it's like, look, I'm going to get married one day and I'm going to have kids one day. And I want to be a supportive husband and father and know how to lead well and also just understand these things. I think we have a duty as men to understand our sisters, our moms, our wives, whatever that might look like. So my other question is just to the men listening, the benefits of actually diving into this stuff and being selfless and understanding all of this, even if it doesn't quote unquote directly affect you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great Red S tools out there now. You can Google them and they have checklists of, you can find out if you're in the green, yellow, or red categories. And, but obviously for those younger athletes, getting your period is so important. If that starts to go away, that's a huge red flag. But that's not the only thing. If you're starting to feel fatigued after a run, or you're starting to feel irritable, you're seeing more kind of musculoskeletal injuries pop up, those are all signifiers that you may not be getting enough caloric intake and your energy is getting expended at a higher rate than what you're taking in. So I think that's one thing just to cue in, that it just doesn't have to be your period. You can still be getting your cycle and still be in red S. So paying attention to some of the other markers. The other thing for young athletes, which we don't talk about enough, is that if you're leaking now, if you're running at the end of a race and you're like, oh man, I'm peeing every time I go into the finish line. And sometimes in athletics, we either don't talk about it or we wear it as a badge of honor. The research shows that if you are having issues now, you're more likely to have issues later in life. And so knowing that that's common, but it's not normal. And we want to be able to seek out and get more information about that. And that can really help during pregnancy then, and then postpartum afterwards. So I think that's some huge things to look out for, even if pregnancy isn't on the radar right now.
Well, and pelvic floor issues are not unique to women, right, Jess?
Correct. Yes.
So do you have anything you'd like to share for our male listeners that are like, doesn't matter for me?
Yeah. In fact, I see so many athletes, because the pelvic floor is part of the core, right? And so when you look at your core, you have your six-pack abs and your obliques. We all know how to train those. And the pelvic floor is the bottom part of that. It gives stability to the system. And what I tend to see, men can have just as many issues as women in pelvic floor dysfunction. That can be pelvic pain. All of a sudden, they think, oh man, I feel like do I have testicular cancer? Do I have other things going on? And the muscles can get too tight, or the muscles, they can have issues with leakage. Men tend to be more in the pelvic pain camp, especially younger athletes. I see this crop up with patients who have hernias or have sportsman hernias, kind of groin pain that's unexplained. And just thinking about that whole entire system, when our foot hits the ground reaction forces have to come up. That core has to transfer that load. And the more efficient it is, the better and more power we get. But if we overtrain some of those core muscles and the pelvic floor is in dysfunction, then we can start to see some of those issues pop up. And I see that a lot in our male athletes. In fact, I'm seeing one tomorrow.
There we go.
And I would say, okay, so it's not exactly to your question. I mean, I guess part one is an answer to your question, which is that our book itself includes ways that you can, as a partner, like a birth partner, whether you're the husband, the same-sex partner, whether you're a family friend, like you can support that birth parent, that mother in her pregnancy journey, both emotionally, but then also, all the way to ways that you're through your hands and through positioning can help her have a better delivery experience. I think I would say more broadly to why people should care about this subject. So Strava's State of Sport, they had about 135 million people across 190 countries. The majority of those people were women, and the majority of those women were in childbearing age. And so when we think about this incredible growth of our sport and the way that running has just taken off from mass participation, if we want to keep those runners in our sport for a long time, having resources for those women who, as Jess said, there's 2 times when they might quit sport, when they get their period and when they get pregnant. We want to keep them. And another fun stat that Strava had, 1 in 5 of Gen Z users went on a date with someone they met via exercise. Our sport has become our social network, and those people that go on dates might very well end up getting married and having kids. The more that we can empower them with information about how to be healthy athletes, whether it's when they're pregnant or not, just more broadly, the more likely that we continue to have healthier, active humans getting those great sport endorphins that make our world a better place.
And I'd add to that, Shannon, the biggest way, I think a partner can support postpartum is, it gets harder to find the time to get fitness, to get the exercises in, to get your run in. And so A, scheduling that in, and then B, just being supportive and saying, okay, how can I help? Can I take care of baby for 20 minutes while you go do that? Can I hold your baby while you do your gym workout?
Like,
I really
you deserve this. You need this. It's good for you
that space
and your mental health.
Yep, creating that space so that women can recover physically afterwards, because it is a major event. And, just no different than after an ACL surgery. Like I said, you want to be able to put the time and effort into getting your body back physically.
Something I wanted to ask both of you about is something I'm sure you cover in the book, but like body self-awareness and love is so, I think, misconstrued and so uncommon, and people think that they can have a baby and then their body is going to look exactly like it looked before pregnancy. And it's like, your body is never going to be the same, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm really curious advice you have for people out there listening who are maybe pregnant and scared of that shifting reality, and also just maybe taking the pressure off of themselves of like, because as society, we live in these extremes. It's like, either I'm going to become my fittest self after having a kid, or I'm going to just never work out again and gain a ton of weight and become unhealthy. And it's like, no, that neither is real. Like, don't do either. Like, so any thoughts on that?
I would say, it's your mark of motherhood. Wear it proudly. And, it's such an honor to be a mom. And I think that mark of motherhood, you're right, it does change things. And we can still get back, and our back is a new norm. It doesn't have to be getting back to our previous selves. Social media, if I had to say one thing to anybody listening, diastasis recti is where the six-pack abs separate, so to speak. And there's a lot of programs out there that say, oh, you've got to get that back. We've got to cure that, and talk so much about how this is a complication for moms and kind of the image of their core and their front. And they did a research study, I think it was in Australia, and they self-selected people from social media. And they said, if you have a diastasis recti, come on in for this study. Well, it was crazy. 72% of people self-selected themselves thinking this was an issue for them, and they didn't have one. Wow. So it just goes to show that, women are concerned about this. They're concerned about what their core looks like. They're concerned about what their abs look like. And really, we can normalize that and say, your core works beautifully. You can get back to doing what you love to do, and it may look different. So.
Social media is just the worst, by the way. I know I make partially a living off of it, but it's like, you see these gym mommy influencers, and it's like, I don't trust you got back to that place in an actual healthy way, or realistic way. And two, like, show the full picture. Like, and moms then will see that and then feel like shit about themselves because they didn't get their six pack back right away, or they never had a six pack to begin with. And then they start beating themselves up. And it's like, influencers are the absolute cancer sometimes to the platform. It's terrible.
Well, and it's the comparison, right? I had an athlete the other day say, like, am I doing enough to stimulate my baby? Am I reading enough books? Am I showing them enough flashcards? Because it's popping up, and we have the social media comparison. And really, I always tell everyone, like, you're the perfect mom. You're the only mom they know. And, we can set down that social comparison and just say, you're the best mom to them, and they're all that you know.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. Jess said that to me. She said that to so many of us, and it's such a, just pithy, important thing to remember, right? Like, we're all learning it the first time we become a parent, mother or father, or whatever you are to that child. We're learning as we go. My grandparents or my parents are learning how to be grandparents, right? Like, it's a new thing for all of us. And if we sort of set that as take that pressure off and understand that this little person that we have the privilege of raising, we're their guide through the world, and really trying to focus more on that versus what everybody else is doing. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say it isn't, but I think that, you're the mom, the only parent they've ever known, is such a wonderful way to kind of distill that.
I'm sure context.
Somebody told me that, Shannon, so I just borrowed it from
passed it on.
Else.
That's how all great things go. Yeah. It's like the classic quote that like all great quotes are attributed to. They all go back to like Winston Churchill or something.
Totally.
So no, but it's all context and perspective. I think for people like you grew a baby, and then when the baby comes out, if you're breastfeeding, like you have all your body, our bodies are remarkable, and they do you carry extra weight for very explicit reasons. And I think when you put that stuff into perspective, it's like, okay, I'm doing just fine. Like,
right. And set realistic timelines. Like, Jess, can you share, because I found this fascinating, the kind of myth of bouncing back isn't even realistic, because it takes how many weeks for the uterus to reduce down to size, and like, could you just share some of those stats? Because I think those are important too, to put things in perspective.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, especially for the core, is your abdomen. So we have collagen in all of our muscles, and that those collagen fibers change when we get pregnant. That's why the belly can expand so big, because the collagen changes to being more the supportive versus that load transfer that we would use for power during sport. And it takes 6 to 9 months before the collagen changes go back to normal. So you might think, oh yeah, I feel ready to go back running. My core feels, maybe a little different, but you have to respect that the collagen fibers really do take a long period of time. Uterus takes a while to shrink back. Sometimes that's 2 weeks, sometimes that's 6 weeks, depending on kind of the person themselves. And then the pelvic floor as well, it goes through changes, and those muscles take about 4 to 6 months. So all of a sudden you're looking at the stability of, the pelvis and hips and going, how are we supposed to transfer all this load? It takes time to get that back. And, part of that's a natural course of history or a natural course of your body. And then part of it is doing the right exercises, the neuromuscular coordination, things that are so important, that are more important for women than they are for our men counterparts, is doing those really small neuromuscular coordination activities. So it'll take some time for sure. And once you're postpartum, you're always postpartum.
Yeah. I want you to do a case study on my mom. So I'm one of 6. I'm the youngest, and you won't believe this. This is more impressive than anything I'll ever do in my life. She had 6 kids with my dad in 7 years. So 6 kids in 7 years.
God.
Yeah. So the oldest will be 28 in April, and I'll turn 21 in May. So it's like almost.
Goodness. God bless her.
Yeah. Yes,
no twins or anything.
Time.
Yeah, crazy stuff. Speaking of twins, I did want to ask you, the elephant in the room here. I think 3% of people have twins. I looked up 0.07% of people have triplets. Have you had it? How does that change things? If you're going 2 human beings, 3 human beings.
Yeah, it does change things. You've got to think about the weight. Weight gain changes. We're going to gain almost up to 54 pounds sometimes if someone is having doubles, right? So the weight changes. So you have to think about what that does on biomechanics. It's more space in that abdomen. And you really have to be under a lot more medical guidance from the doctor in terms of making sure that exercise is safe during pregnancy, because they do have restrictions and things that they're watching out for. So, that exercise might look different. That might be stretching, that might be yoga or Pilates, or maybe lower kind of high impact activities. So it might be swimming and some of those things, as opposed to pounding the pavement, because you have to see where the biomechanical risk versus the reward is.
Final question for you guys. What's the final takeaway from our conversation today from the book that you want to give to the listener? And then what's your, I'm certainly going to go pre-order this book today now that I know it's available, but what's your pitch to everyone out there listening, just to what the book can do for them, regardless of who they are, whether they're pregnant or not?
I would say knowledge is power and movement is medicine. We live by those things. And, the book gives you that opportunity to get knowledge on what to do for yourself, make your own healthcare choices. And it doesn't matter how little or much you do. It's just all those little bricks that you're laying during pregnancy and postpartum that are going to get you back doing what you love to do. And whether that's on the roads or whether that's some other activity, but it's going to get you back doing what you love to do.
Yeah, and I would say, we had a conversation about the kind of abundance of information that has popped up. Our goal was to create a medically backed, Olympic tested resource that is applicable to every mom out there. And in creating Strong as a Mother, really create a resource that empowers moms to make the best choice for themselves and their baby throughout that pregnancy journey.
You both are incredible. Thank you for this conversation. I learned so much. I feel like this was science class for me, going back in time to school. And truly, congratulations on this piece of art. Like I always, Shannon, you know this from our conversations, but just have respect for people who take action in who genuinely don't. You guys could have sat at a dinner table for 40 years and said, I know all this stuff and I have this cool idea to write a book, but you know that friend that never writes the book. And so really
Right.
proud of you guys for putting this out to the world and excited to see the impact it creates.
Thanks for giving us a platform to share it. You've built something really incredible with the running effect, and it's really like it's a privilege for us to get to be here with you today.